Let me tell you a story about a man not bound by the rhythms of romance, nor distracted by the chaos of companionship. He lives alone, not because he must, but because he chooses to. You see, the world looks at a man like that and wonders if something's wrong. But they don't understand. They don't hear the silence that speaks to him like a friend. They don't see the peace that fills the corners of his quiet room. This isn't a story of loneliness. No, this is a story of power, of patience, of purpose. A man without a girlfriend isn't empty. He's focused, he's learning, he's building. And most importantly, he's free. You can almost hear the hush of a room untouched by commotion, the soft tick of a steady old clock marking the slow progress of time. There, a man sits alone, and in the quiet he has learned to listen to something that most folks never hear, the gentle murmur of his own soul. At first, the silence terrified him. It sounded like the echo of an empty canyon. But gradually he understood that silence is not emptiness. It is space, the wide open plains of the mind waiting to be walked, mapped, cultivated. So he began where any brave pioneer would begin, by pitching a tent in the middle of the unknown and lighting a campfire of curiosity. Night after night he read passages from ancient sages, poets, novelists who wrestled with storms of the heart. By the orange glow he underlined sentences that seemed to breathe, sentences that hinted at the architecture of character. He let those words seep into him, a slow infusion, until they mingled with his own questions and took on the shape of resolve. In the morning he rose before dawn, before the birds declared the sun's return, and stepped outside to walk. In the hush, dew clung to his boots and every leaf appeared wrapped in silver threads of light. With each footstep he rehearsed conversations with himself, unrushed, unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortable. Why did I flinch at that criticism yesterday? Why was I proud of that small kindness the day before? He weighed these matters with the patience of a seasoned judge. No courtroom drama, just quiet deliberation. A lesser man might have sought applause or consolation, but this man knew applause fades and consolation can become a crutch. So he learned to harvest his own affirmations quietly, like a farmer gathers wheat, and he stored them in granaries deep within the heart for the cold seasons that surely come. Some evenings, when shadows hardened along the walls, he sat at a modest desk stained by rings of coffee and scribbled in a worn journal. Not grandeur, not public declarations, just small notations. Spoke too sharply to the grocer today, felt a burst of gratitude when the rain lifted at sunset. He wrote because writing is a mirror, and mirrors do not flatter, they reflect. And in that reflection he caught glimpses of a man emerging, rough-edged yet unmistakably real, a man he might one day fully trust. Over time, the blank pages piled up, page after page of confessions, sketches of dreams, plans half-formed, prayers half-spoken, each volume a brick, each brick a wall, each wall a room in a house of inner life. It takes patience to build such a dwelling, and patience he had in abundance. Brick by steady brick, he raised halls of memory, chambers of intention, windows of reflection from which he could look out upon the world with clarity. People talk often about freedom, but rarely do they grasp its weight. They imagine freedom as the absence of chains. He knew better. He felt the heft of choices resting on his shoulders like a yoke fashioned by his own hands. Who you choose to become when nobody's looking. That is the gravest liberty awarded to any soul. And so he practiced the discipline of being his own witness. At the edge of action, he would pause, ask, is this true to the man I'm shaping? Then he would proceed or refrain accordingly. It slowed him down, yes, but fine craftsmanship is never hurried. A life hurried is a life half finished. Corners cut, beams unsanded. He wasn't interested in that kind of shelter. He was after cathedrals of character, arches that echo with integrity, pillars that bear the storms of circumstance, stained glass that filters sorrow into colored wisdom. Visitors sometimes stepped into his solitude. Old friends, curious neighbors, a wandering cat, and they noticed something in the air like the faint scent of cedar in a newly built library. They could not name it, but they felt it. Stillness that wasn't stagnant. Quiet that hummed with energy. They spoke a little softer, sat a little straighter, as if the room itself expected sincerity. And he welcomed them, offered tea, listened longer than he spoke. For a man who knows his mind can afford to listen, he no longer fears the empty spaces in conversation. If the guests carried worries on their brows, he never rushed to fix them. Instead, he shared how he had walked his own corridors of doubt until the darkness grew familiar and the light more precious. They left lighter, though seldom sure why. He never boasted, never declared his methods superior. He simply embodied them, and embodiment is the finest persuasion. At night, when the lamps dimmed and the world outside pressed its face to the window like a restless child, he felt gratitude swell in his chest. Gratitude not just for accomplishments, those come and go, but for the rare privilege of knowing himself. Many run from that task their entire lives, drowning introspection in noise. He drank from the quieter well. He understood that an inner world once tended becomes a kingdom difficult to topple. Misfortune may storm the gates, loss may batter the walls, but a man who has fortified his heart with self-knowledge stands in the courtyard unafraid. His voice, when it speaks, carries the calm of one who has negotiated with his own shadows and signed treaties with his own doubts. That is why when you meet him, you may sense a timeless quality, as though he's in league with something older than the confusion of the day. So the man who lives alone is not a hermit fleeing life. He is an architect laboring upon the most important construction any human ever attempts, the self. In the depth of solitude, he lays foundations of principle, erects towers of understanding, opens skylights of wonder, and invites the light to pour in. Someday, perhaps, another soul will walk those hallways beside him, and he will welcome her not as a rescuer, but as a fellow builder. Until then, and even then, his inner world will stand solid and whole, singing its quiet hymn of completeness beneath the vast, untroubled sky. It begins at first light, long before the town rouses itself. He swings his legs out of bed, the floorboards cool against his feet, and moves with the quiet certainty of a man who trusts his own rhythms. There is no voice calling from another room to remind him of schedules, no impatient clatter of someone else's morning routine. He does not require such prompts because he has become his own steward, his own clockmaker. In the stillness, he grinds fresh coffee beans, slowly, deliberately, and listens for the faint crackle as hot water kisses the grounds. That sound is a pledge. Today, like yesterday, he will rely on no hand but his own to carry him forward. After breakfast, he surveys his small kingdom. A sputtering faucet. He fetches the wrench, studies the faulty seal, and learns from the stubborn dripping how patience and persistence can conquer even the smallest rebellions of matter. A sagging shelf. He measures twice, cuts once, and aligns the bracket until the spirit level rests perfectly between its lines. Some might call it menial labor. Yet he understands the deeper lesson. Self-reliance is built plank by plank, screw by screw, each repair a reminder that competence is the quietest brand of confidence. Bills weighed in a neat stack near the doorway. He does not push them aside or sigh with resentment. He sits, opens each envelope, and tallies figures with the steady discipline of a seasoned accountant. Numbers reveal stories of spending, of saving, of priorities made clear. When setbacks appear, a surprise medical fee, the sudden need for a new tire, he does not spiral into panic. He revises the ledger, trims extravagance, trusts that calm calculation will keep his vessel afloat. There is dignity in stewardship, the kind that cannot be conferred by another's praise. Only a man who stands firmly on his own 2 feet knows the deep sleep that follows earned security. In the afternoon, he selects ingredients for dinner. Not the frozen convenience that promises speed, but fresh produce chosen by sight, scent, and heft. He dices onions with practiced strokes, seasons a modest cut of meat, simmers vegetables until they surrender their flavors to the broth. Cooking, too, is a pledge. An agreement to nourish the body in the same way diligent thought nourishes the mind. He sets a single place at the table, but the meal is no less ceremonial for being solitary. What begins as sustenance becomes ritual, a reaffirmation that self-care is not selfish but foundational. In quiet hours, he attends to less tangible repairs. A mind, after all, can wobble like a misaligned hinge. So he reads philosophy and history, letting the words of long-departed thinkers sand the rough edges of his assumptions. He practices a language he may never need, tunes a guitar string until the note rings true, or kneels to tend a potted plant whose green leaves depend entirely on his vigilance. These tasks do not shout for recognition. They are whispered investments into the treasury of resilience, each one a coin laid carefully by for future trials. Sometimes the world presses in from outside. A neighbor knocks, asking for help moving a heavy dresser. A friend calls in distress, searching for steady counsel. He answers the door, he picks up the phone, and he offers assistance without complaint. You see, self-reliance is not isolation, it is surplus. Because he needs no rescuer, he is free to become one when another soul stumbles. His hands, trained by countless small labors, lift the burden with practiced ease. His voice, tempered by solitude, speaks calm into someone else's storm. And when the task is done, he does not wait for gratitude to validate his worth. His worth has already been validated in the furnace of daily discipline. Evening comes. The sun pours gold across the wooden floor. He reviews the day with clear eyes. The faucet now runs smooth, the shelf stands sturdy. The bills are squared away, the meal's warmth lingers in the air. Each completed chore is a signature on the ledger of self-respect. Failure and frustration made their appearances, as they always do, yet he faced them squarely and did not outsource the confrontation. In choosing responsibility over resignation, he has written again the quiet manifesto of the self-reliant. I will meet life on its terms and amend those terms with my own effort. Before bed, he steps outside beneath a quilt of stars. The sky is vast, ancient, indifferent, and yet he does not feel small, for he belongs wholly to himself. He has proven, if only to the silence, that a single human being can be both question and answer, need and provision, seed and harvest. Tomorrow the cycle will begin anew, and he will greet it, not with dread, but with the calm certainty of a craftsman pleased to practice his art once more. So when you see the man who lives alone, do not mistake his independence for loneliness. Understand that every repaired hinge, every balanced budget, every quiet meal savored in the lamplight is an act of radical affirmation that a life when held with capable hands and a resolute mind can become its own sturdy shelter. In that shelter, storms may howl and seasons may change, but the roof is sound, the foundation true, and the lamp inside, fueled by self-reliance, will not soon go out. There is a difference, between reaching out and latching on, between the gentle tap that says, "Are you there?" and the white-knuckled grip that begs, "Don't leave me." The man who lives alone has learned that lesson the way rivers learn their banks, with time, with patience, and with the quiet carving of repeated experience. Once he mistook proximity for intimacy, mistook the heat of a crowded room for the warmth of genuine understanding. Now he smells the difference like fresh rain on dry soil. He craves neither applause nor avoidance. He craves resonance, a voice that answers back with similar timbre of honesty, even if it only answers once in a blue moon. His phone does not buzz at every hour. That is not neglect, but design. When it does vibrate, he lifts it from the table softly as though the device itself holds a fragile bird and reads the message twice, measuring sincerity between the lines. A friend writes with real news, real feeling, and he responds with the patience of a craftsman. Every word chosen, every sentiment examined. He will not type a dozen emojis to fill the awkward gap where meaning should be. He lets the silence breathe so truth can find its seat. This restraint is not pride, it is stewardship. For he knows words given cheaply are like coins tossed into a fountain, pretty in the moment but useless once the wish fades. Some afternoons he walks to the local cafe. Not because he must escape emptiness, but because a conversation over steaming mugs can be a small sacrament. He sits near the window where sunlight dusts the worn wooden floor and listens as the barista hums an old soul melody under her breath. If an acquaintance joins him, he leans forward, elbows on knees, eyes steady. He asks questions that drill past weather and sports, questions crafted to unearth a person's hopes the way a gardener loosens soil around a seed. People sense the difference. They feel how present he is, how his gaze never flickers toward the door in search of better company. And so they surprise themselves by offering something real, a worry about aging parents, a confession of creative dreams pinned under day jobs, a flicker of grief still smoldering after years. He receives it all the way a forest receives autumn leaves, quietly, gratefully, knowing it will enrich the soil of connection. Should romance flutter nearer, he does not chase it down the street like a startled child after a kite. Instead, he invites it to walk beside him at the pace of trust. Over dinner, he will set an extra fork, light a candle that smells faintly of sandalwood, and share laughter low and unforced. Yet he will not package his soul for overnight delivery. He will hand it over in installments, each page signed and dated, so neither of them forgets the chronology of discovery. If sparks fly, he delights in their warmth, but refuses to mistake them for a hearth. Hearths are built stone upon stone, fire tended daily by 2 pairs of hands. Until he finds a partner willing to share that steady labor, he keeps his own fire glowing, neither dimmed by longing nor flaring with desperation. You might wonder where he stores the inevitable ache of lonely moments. He keeps it in a weathered box on a high shelf inside his heart, labeled honestly, human yearning. When the ache calls out, he does not smother it with distractions. He lifts the box down, sits with it, and lets the feeling speak its piece. Sometimes it tells him to phone an old friend. Sometimes it tells him to drive out to the ridge where city lights shimmer like scattered jewels. Sometimes it simply asks for a quiet tear, shed with dignity. In answering the ache directly, he prevents it from mutating into hunger for any warm body, any nod of approval. The ache remains what it ought to be, proof that his heart still beats, still hopes, rather than growing into a weed that strangles discernment. He has boundaries, yes, but they are not prison walls. They are garden fences. The gate swings wide for kindness, wisdom, and shared wonder. It closes gently yet firmly against manipulation disguised as affection. He recognizes how flattery can drip sweet as honey, yet coat the tongue with dependence, how jealousy dresses itself in concern but clanks like a shackle when it walks. So he listens for subtle changes in tone, watches for tiny withdrawals of respect, and when he senses them, he addresses them candidly. If the other soul can meet him in that clarity, the bond deepens. If not, the gate eases shut without rancor. Compassion, he's learned, thrives best in the soil of mutual choice, not in the swamp of obligation.
Night finds him by the window, moonlight pooling on the floor. He thinks of the people whose laughter lingers in his mind like the soft ring of a distant bell, of the handwritten letters tucked in the drawer, of the single rose pressed between pages of a book because its giver spoke honestly once, and that was enough to sanctify the bloom. He feels rich, not in quantity but in quality. Each connection is a clear stone in the pocket of memory, cool, solid, unbreakable. In the hush, he realizes that choosing genuine bonds over dependency was never about having fewer people. It was about having people who are not afraid to meet him at the quiet depth where real life occurs. And in that depth, he is never truly alone, for the echoes of authentic souls travel far and linger long like stars whose light keeps shining long after they have moved on to another corner of the sky. He wakes before dawn, long before the city's pulse begins its restless thrum, and the hush of the hour is thick enough to feel on the skin. In that hush he stretches, not like a man trying to shake off sleep, but like a craftsman warming his tools. There is no partner groaning at the alarm, no whispered negotiations about who makes coffee first. The air is his alone, unclaimed, brimming with potential. He lights a single lamp on his desk, and its amber glow spills across an open notebook. The blank page is an invitation, an uncharted coastline on which he will draft the maps of his purpose.
Most folks confuse motion with progress. They rush through traffic, juggle meetings, scroll through 1,000 half-lives on glowing screens, and by nightfall they call themselves exhausted. But exhaustion is often just evidence of directionless expenditure. This man, quiet, deliberate, has traded motion for momentum and momentum for meaning. He trims his schedule the way a gardener prunes a rose bush. Firm cuts, precise cuts, cuts that make room for stronger blossoms to emerge. Anything that does not serve the central blueprint of his purpose is set aside without apology. He knows that time once wasted does not regenerate like muscle. It dissolves into mist and drifts away forever. With the sunrise comes practice. He studies, sometimes the mathematics behind investing, sometimes the arc of a story he hopes to write, sometimes the historical forces that shape the world he wants to improve. Shoulder to the grindstone, yes, but the grind is not punishment, it is refinement. He is sharpening a chisel meant for sculpting significance. Each concept mastered is another groove carved into the instrument of his intent, making it fit his hand more perfectly. And with every new notch, he feels the heft of his purpose settle a little more comfortably against his palm. When noon arrives, he steps back from the table and lifts weights in a makeshift gym that smells of iron and cedar. His body is not merely a transport vehicle for his ambitions. It is the furnace in which those ambitions are tempered. Sweat beads, muscles strain, lungs expand like bellows. He is forging resilience beneath the skin so that when external storms test him, his internal scaffolding will not buckle. Purpose, he's learned, must be carried, and a weak body drops heavy loads. So he trains not for vanity, but for longevity. A strong spine today means a steady hand tomorrow, and tomorrow matters because his vision stretches far beyond the horizon of immediate gratification. Afternoons find him at work, the kind that pays bills, yes, but also teaches discipline. He brings to it the same methodical focus that threads through his personal projects. Co-workers notice how he meets deadlines with room to spare, how he solves problems without fuss, how he leaves gossip untouched as though it were some sticky residue best avoided. They wonder what fuels such serenity. They don't see the roots of purpose winding beneath every action, drawing nutrients from each experience, feeding something larger than a paycheck or a promotion. Even tedium becomes recital, scales rehearsed by a pianist preparing for a grand concerto yet to be written. When dusk drapes itself over the rooftops, he returns to the notebook. Now the day's lessons, victories, and missteps are poured onto fresh pages like molten metal into a mold. Reflection is where raw ore becomes usable steel. He measures himself not against others, but against yesterday's version of the man in the mirror. Did he wander from his course? Why? How will he correct? The questions are stern but fair, and the answers guide the next iteration of his routine. Evolution, after all, is simply disciplined adjustment repeated until excellence becomes inevitable. People sometimes ask if he's lonely in all that focus. They imagine purpose as a stern taskmaster forcing him to forfeit joy. He smiles at their worry. Joy is woven through every fiber of what he does. Steady, quiet joy that doesn't need loud music or bright lights to announce its presence. It appears in the crisp crack of a well-turned page, in the burn of a final push-up completed after muscles trembled with fatigue, in the subtle click of an idea sliding perfectly into place. These are small notes in the symphony of a meaningful life, and he hears them clear as church bells at twilight. On weekends, he volunteers at a community workshop, teaching teenagers to carve wood into shapes that please the hand and serve the heart. He does not flaunt his knowledge, he offers it like bread broken at a table. Each lesson he shares echoes his understanding that purpose grows when it is given away. The young ones see in him a model of patient mastery, and maybe years from now, one of them will recall the steady cadence of his voice when their own path narrows and darkens. Thus his purpose will carry forward, dispersed yet never diminished, like seeds on the wind. Finally, the night settles, moonlight pooling on the floorboards, and he closes the lamp. The city's clamor has receded to a distant murmur, and within the gentle tide of that quiet, he senses the day's labors aligning piece by piece into a structure only he can see. It is unfinished, yes, but its silhouette grows clearer with every sunrise he meets. He rests then, not in exhaustion but in earned repose, knowing that the blueprint for tomorrow already waits on that open page, and time, his loyal ally, will be there at dawn, ready to help him build again. He wakes before dawn, long before the city's pulse begins its restless thrum, and the hush of the hour is thick enough to feel on the skin. In that hush he stretches, not like a man trying to shake off sleep, but like a craftsman warming his tools. There is no partner groaning at the alarm, no whispered negotiations about who makes coffee first. The air is his alone, unclaimed, brimming with potential. He lights a single lamp on his desk, and its amber glow spills across an open notebook. The blank page is an invitation, an uncharted coastline on which he will draft the maps of his purpose. Most folks confuse motion with progress. They rush through traffic, juggle meetings, scroll through 1,000 half-lives on glowing screens, and by nightfall they call themselves exhausted. But exhaustion is often just evidence of directionless expenditure. This man, quiet, deliberate, has traded motion for momentum and momentum for meaning. He trims his schedule the way a gardener prunes a rosebush, firm cuts, precise cuts, cuts that make room for stronger blossoms to emerge. Anything that does not serve the central blueprint of his purpose is set aside without apology. He knows that time once wasted does not regenerate like muscle. It dissolves into mist and drifts away forever. With the sunrise comes practice. He studies, sometimes the mathematics behind investing, sometimes the arc of a story he hopes to write, sometimes the historical forces that shape the world he wants to improve. Shoulder to the grindstone, yes, but the grind is not punishment, it is refinement. He is sharpening a chisel meant for sculpting significance. Each concept mastered is another groove carved into the instrument of his intent, making it fit his hand more perfectly. And with every new notch, he feels the heft of his purpose settle a little more comfortably against his palm. When noon arrives, he steps back from the table and lifts weights in a makeshift gym that smells of iron and cedar. His body is not merely a transport vehicle for his ambitions. It is the furnace in which those ambitions are tempered. Sweat beads, muscles strain, lungs expand like bellows. He is forging resilience beneath the skin, so that when external storms test him, his internal scaffolding will not buckle. Purpose, he's learned, must be carried, and a weak body drops heavy loads. So he trains not for vanity, but for longevity. A strong spine today means a steady hand tomorrow, and tomorrow matters because his vision stretches far beyond the horizon of immediate gratification. Afternoons find him at work, the kind that pays bills, yes, but also teaches discipline. He brings to it the same methodical focus that threads through his personal projects. Co-workers notice how he meets deadlines with room to spare, how he solves problems without fuss, how he leaves gossip untouched as though it were some sticky residue best avoided. They wonder what fuels such serenity. They don't see the roots of purpose winding beneath every action, drawing nutrients from each experience, feeding something larger than a paycheck or a promotion. Even tedium becomes recital, scales rehearsed by a pianist preparing for a grand concerto yet to be written. When dusk drapes itself over the rooftops, he returns to the notebook. Now the day's lessons, victories, and missteps are poured onto fresh pages like molten metal into a mold. Reflection is where raw ore becomes usable steel. He measures himself not against others, but against yesterday's version of the man in the mirror. Did he wander from his course? Why? How will he correct? The questions are stern but fair, and the answers guide the next iteration of his routine. Evolution, after all, is simply disciplined adjustment repeated until excellence becomes inevitable. People sometimes ask if he's lonely in all that focus. They imagine purpose as a stern taskmaster forcing him to forfeit joy. He smiles at their worry. Joy is woven through every fiber of what he does.